in at number 10, we have the incense maker. The case of the incense was so intense that it ended up being studied by a psychology professor at the Faculty Society Science at the University of Iceland. The story goes that a girl called Panima Ekanyake from Sri Lanka, who would talk about her previous life from the moment that she could talk, basically was adamant that she'd lived before. At 4, she saw a temple in a different region of town on the television and claimed to her parents that she'd lived nearby, despite never having been there. The things that she would say got weirder and weirder as she got older. She told her mother that she had another mother and father and that she worked in an incense factory, but she died in a bus accident. I know kids say some weird things, but this does seem pretty specific. Panima had 2 birthmarks, and she said that they were where the bus had run her over in a previous life, causing her injuries. One day her mother was sad about a person dying in a car accident, to which she tried to comfort her, saying that she died in a car accident too, but she'd been brought there. Weird. Eventually her parents became convinced that their daughter had lived a previous life, which was when the psychology professor got involved. In his research, he managed to trace the incense factory that the girl said that she'd worked at, and he discovered that the person she identified with in her previous life was a man. He found the man's brother, the factory owner, who confirmed that his brother did die in a bus accident while bringing incense from market. Now this was 2 years before the little girl's birth. The professor brought Panima and her family to the town, which they had never been to, but of course the girl recognized. She met the man, who may or may not have been her brother in a previous life, and immediately recognized him. He was actually really freaked out by her, but she managed to win him around. She knew so much detail about his life, and also she knew exactly how to make incense, despite that not being a skill that she'd ever been exposed to. When the brother saw her birthmarks in the exact spot that his brothers had succumbed to his injuries, he became a believer. Another story of brothers at number 9. Things are getting even weirder. This is the story of the Christiansen brothers, and it is so strange and somewhat unsettling. So Patrick Christiansen was born in Michigan in March 1991. He was the light end of a dark tunnel for his parents, who had lost a child called Patrick, aged just 2, 12 years prior. Patrick was born like any normal baby, but as he started to grow, doctors noticed that things were not quite right. He walked with a slight limp and developed a nodule on his scalp, which he had biopsied. Sadly, it was discovered that he had cancer and he was given chemotherapy. Now this left him with scars to the right hand and on his neck. Sadly, he died shortly after his 2nd birthday. His parents obviously were devastated. 12 years later, enter his brother Patrick. Now, Patrick had very strange birthmarks in similar spots that his brothers had scars. When he grew a bit, his parents found that he was walking with a limp, but doctors found that there was actually nothing wrong with him. When he was 4 years old, he told his mother that he wanted to go back to the orange and brown house, a house eerily matching a description of the family's old home that he'd never been to, but his brother had lived in. As he could talk more, he asked his mother if she could remember when he had surgery. She was baffled. She said he'd never had surgery, but then he pointed to a place where his brother had had his biopsy. It certainly seems as if Patrick was living Kevin's memories. We have a very strange story at number 8. We have The Choice. This isn't so much a reincarnation story as it is an incarnation story, a story of a child who remembers actually picking their parents. Sounds strange, right? Keep on listening, because things get very weird. Judy Smith, who is now a pensioner in her 70s, says that she remembers being somewhere above the earth looking down at a gathering of pairs of people. It was then that she heard a voice in her head asking her to pick between the group, asking her to pick her parents. The voice said that they would teach her everything that she needed to know, she just needed to pick. Now she remembers this so vividly to this day, and she told her parents when she was old enough to talk that she had actually chosen them. She doesn't remember too much about the place she was in when she was choosing, only that she was high up. Her story is echoed in that of other children in the press who have claimed that they have chosen their parents in similar situations. Really weird, but I have to say, if I could choose, I would still pick my mum and dad. Here's a picture of them from the 80s before they had me. Big love! Coming in at number 7, we have The Truck. Dr. Wayne Dyer wrote a book about reincarnation called Memories of Heaven. Make of that what you will, but some of the stories are pretty interesting. In that book, he shared the disturbing story of mother Els van Poppel. Els had a son who was nearing his 2nd birthday when he said something extremely disturbing as they were about to cross the road. He gripped his mother's hand and said, "Careful, or else I will die again." His mother was so shocked by what her son said, but he wasn't done. He continued by saying, "Remember when I was little and I fell and my head was on the road and the truck drove over it." Jesus, that really takes the biscuit of creepy things that kids could say. Well, now Els was absolutely sure that her son had never had a nightmare like this, nor had he actually seen anything like this on television that might have been similar. Dr. Wayne Dyer also shared the next story in his book. We have The Foreign Mother. Now this story is about his own daughter. Serena Dyer would often talk in her sleep. At first her parents thought she was speaking nonsense until they listened harder and realized that actually she was talking another language. One night she woke up shouting in this other language and her mother went to comfort her. In a dazed and confused state, Serena said, "You're not my real mother. I have a real mother that I remember, but it's not you." Imagine hearing that, honestly, that's so heartbreaking, and also, what is going on? One more short creepy story from Dr. Wayne's book that I really want to mention because it is so scary. We have The Child Mum at number 5. It seems that mother Suzanne Robinson was tired one day. Honestly, looking after kids can be super exhausting, and I'm saying that and I don't even have them, so imagine if you did and I don't know, they're there all the time, they want attention and you just want a nap. So anyway, Suzanne fell asleep, which I think is totally understandable. She was looking after her 3-year-old daughter at the time, and she woke up to her daughter stroking her hair in a very, very maternal and caring way. When Suzanne came round, her daughter said, "Don't you remember? I used to be your mother." "What are you talking about? No, you didn't, you're my child." Ah! Okay, let's take a light break from all this intensity, shall we? All of these stories have been really, really, really intense, but I feel like I need a little splash of breathing space. At number 4, I really want to talk about how Nicolas Cage is either reincarnated or is legit a time traveler. Either works. Have a look at Nicolas Cage. Here he is in all of his glory. What a man, what an actor. Well, here is a Civil War man from Tennessee who is also actually Nicolas Cage. Hello there, Southern States Cage. How you doing? The image surfaced after an eBay seller attempted to sell the 1870s portrait on the auction site. Now in the description, they claimed that Nicolas Cage was a vampire. Of course, logical explanation. David Letterman even asked Cage about it on his show and he denied it. Okay, maybe he isn't a vampire, but he is the spit of this guy, so I'm saying he was probably reincarnated. Okay, back to the intensity. Coming in at number 3, we have The Bridge. Back in 1994, a woman went on the Oprah Winfrey Show to talk about her daughter Leah. It seems when Leah was just 2 years old, she was in the car seat of her mother's car and the pair were driving over a bridge. As they were driving, she suddenly exclaimed, "This is just like where I died." What? Her mother of course was extremely shocked, but her daughter explained it all in a matter-of-fact detail. Have a listen.
I said, "Well, who was driving the car then?" And she said, "I was big. I could reach the pedals." And she has no clue that you need pedals to drive a car. She's 2. She's in the car seat.
I legit do not know what I would do if somebody said that to me. It seems her daughter was telling her that she was in an accident where she drove off a bridge and drowned. Her mother pressed her further and she said that she wasn't wearing a seatbelt when she drove off the bridge. Then she said this.
I was laying on the rocks. I could feel the rocks on my head. And she said, "And see the shiny bridge." And she points up. She's looking up. And she says, "See the shiny bridge and the bubbles going up."
Honestly, that is terrifying. This is a very interesting story at number 2. We have The Boy from Barra. Now Barra is a small island in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. Cameron Macaulay from Glasgow was absolutely convinced that he'd lived there despite never actually having been. Ever since he was able to talk, he told his family members that his mother on Barra, other mother, must be missing him. At first his mum was totally weirded out by it, but she didn't think too much of it because, you know, kids and their imaginations. But then he started describing his life in very accurate detail. He said he lived in a white house with 3 toilets and that he had a black and white dog and his family owned a black car. He said that he had a mother with long brown hair and his dad had died from quote unquote not looking both ways. He also explained the beach of Barra in super great detail. His parents decided in the end that enough was enough. They actually believed him. They were gonna take Cameron to Barra to find the house. They went to Barra and you know what? They did find the house, but there was a different family living there than Cameron remembered. That being said, he knew his way around it and it did indeed have 3 bathrooms. The beach was also exactly as Cameron had described. Eventually, the family traced a distant relative of a family who had previously lived in the home. Now, that family had a black car and a black and white dog. Creepy. Finally, So creepy, so weird, I don't know what I would do. At number 1, we have the Nazi pilot. Imagine your child starts drawing swastikas. Disturbing, right? Well, they probably don't know what it means, but then imagine asking him what they were drawing and then discovering that your child could well be the reincarnation of a Nazi Luftwaffe bomber. Like, words, I don't have words for this. Val Eden noticed that her 5-year-old son was drawing eagles and then a swastika. When she asked what he was drawing, he replied totally innocently that he was drawing his badges. It seemed that when he was younger he would also wake up from terrible nightmares in which he said his leg was missing after a plane disaster. Of course that's super weird and really vivid for a 2-year-old. When he was 6, his dad found a picture of a plane cockpit in his son's room, and little Carl was able to pinpoint in exact detail all of the gauges, levers and pedals, including the one that would drop a bomb. It seems his nightmares came back and got even more vivid as he got older. He could explain his dreams now. He said that the engine of his plane had died, he opened a hatch to try and get out, but his right leg was gone. The boy had a red birthmark on his right leg. Strange. When his parents pressed Carl, he was able to explain his exact uniform. He said he was in the Air Force, and also he was able to explain the exact model of warplane that he was flying. His obsession with his past life grew, and he would describe to people at school how his former father Fritz would teach him about flowers and trees. He also said he was supposed to marry a woman from his village, and he was sad when he died because he couldn't. On a side note, it seemed that actually a few Luftwaffe bomber planes had come down near where the Eden family were living in Middlesbrough. Now this had all happened in England in 1942, and 3 bodies were found. Fast forward a few years, Carl actually ended up being murdered as a young adult. His story is super crazy and so worth looking into if you can. You don't have time in this video to uncover all of the ins and outs of it. It's worth an hour-long video just of its own. Like I said, it is so interesting. I will say though, researchers may have uncovered the lost body of a German pilot that he thought he was. Now this was all happening a few years after Carl's death. It seems that there was a 4th body that was found decades later from another plane that had come down with the others in 1942. The body was identified as Heinrich Richter. Here's a picture of him. Now, here's a picture of Carl as an adult. They bear more than a passing resemblance. I for one, actually, am quite convinced.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Barbro Karlin. A woman named Barbro Karlin was born in 1954 in Sweden, and by the time she could talk she began telling her parents some pretty frightening stories. She said she could remember men kicking down the door of her home and taking her away, which is obviously quite a frightening memory for a child to be having, and one that certainly never had happened in Barbro's life at that point. She also told them a name that means a lot to us all now, but at the time her parents had no idea who this person was. That name was Anne Frank. Anne Frank, of course, passed away in a concentration camp in 1945 after hiding in an attic with her family, trying to avoid persecution for being Jewish. Just 10 years after Anne's passing, she wasn't well known like she is today, but when Barbro was 10 years old, they took her to Amsterdam and she was able to lead them to Anne's home with no directions at all. She was then able to identify a spot on the wall where Anne had hung photos up, and she also told her parents that the steps in the home were different than she had remembered them, which held up with the history of construction that the house had already gone through. By the time she was 16, she was already writing books and poetry, and she had actually ended up going on to befriend a close relative of Anne's named Buddy Elias. Whether Barbro is a real and true reincarnation of Anne is of course to be proven for sure, but I definitely do like the idea of Anne connecting with people from her life and also having a much better life this time as Barbro. In our number 9 spot today we have Lee. Before I dive into this one, guys, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video. It does really help us out, we appreciate it. When a child named Lee was only 2 years old, he began talking about his other house with his other mom. This would certainly be quite concerning to any parent, and by the time he was 3, he was claiming that his birthday was on June 26th, even though it was not. This continued on and Lee's claims grew and grew. He began to give even more information on what he remembers as his past life, saying that his middle name was Ko, he wrote movies for a living, he had a daughter named Jennifer, and that he had passed away at the age of 48. This is all pretty crazy for a toddler to be explaining, but instead of being frightened, Lee's parents began inquiring more and asking him even more questions. They wanted to know which movie he had written, as to possibly figure out who their son believed he had been before. His parents parents began to ask him titles of different movies to see if any rang a bell, and when they asked him about Gone with the Wind, Lee got very excited and said that he had definitely written that one. Lee's parents obviously quickly googled the movie to find more information, and this is when they found out about the movie's writer, Sidney Coe Howard. Sidney, of course, had the correct middle name, his birthday was June 26th, he did have a daughter named Jennifer, and he did pass away at the age of 48. My initial reaction is that his parents had possibly unknowingly fed him this information, but apparently this Google search was the first time his parents had heard any of this information, aside from hearing it from their child. This is certainly quite a crazy story, and one that may possibly have me convinced. In our number 8 spot today we have Sergei Torop. Sergei is also known as Vissarion, and he is a Russian mystic and leader of the cult Church of the Last Testament. He also claims that in August of 1990, when he was 29 years old, he had a revelation that he was in fact the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and this led to him starting a cult. How convenient! As the leader of the cult, he is said to teach reincarnation, veganism, and harmonious human relations, predicting the end of the world. This doesn't sound too bad except for the whole thing about being Jesus, but here's the kicker. He was arrested in September of 2020 on charges of running an illegal religious organization, as well as for causing harm to others and extortion. Also, if you go on his Wikipedia page and look under the personal life section, you'll see some other weird stuff I really can't talk about on YouTube, but definitely earned him a spot on today's list. In our number 7 spot today we have James Leninger. James Leninger was only 4 years old when he began to recount events from his past life. He swore that he had been a World War II pilot that had been shot down over Iwo Jima. These memories first came back when James' parents found him one night after he had woken up from a nightmare yelling, "Airplane crash, plane on fire, little man can't get out." James explained that his name in his past life was also James, and that he had flown an aircraft called the Natoma. His parents did some research after these claims and found out that there was an aircraft carrier during World War II called the Natoma Bay, and there was a pilot who had been killed in action in this plane over the Pacific named James Houston. They began to ask him questions about his past life, including questions about the airplane that would be truly surprising for a small child to have answers to, like when his mom referred to an object on the bottom of a toy plane as a bomb, and James responded by correcting her, telling her it was a drop tank, or when one day they were all watching a documentary on the History Channel, and the narrator of the show referred to a plane as a zero, and James said that was untrue and it was actually a Tony. I have no idea what any of this means, but apparently James was right both times. This is obviously a pretty unbelievable story, and many people think that James just took an interest in World War II and planes at a young age and had somehow been exposed to this information previously, but his parents swear that that just isn't true. In our number 6 spot today we have Jim Jones. Jim Jones is certainly one of the most well-known people on this list for all of the wrong reasons. He is the man who claimed that he was a reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Gandhi. That's a record. And he also founded the cult, which was originally called Wings of Deliverance, but he later changed the name to the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. After an expose in the New West magazine about the things going on in this cult, he ended up moving the group from the United States to Guyana. From here there were claims of horrible things and human rights violations, which led to an investigation. People found out that some of the supposed members of this cult were actually being held against their will. What a surprise. In the end, with all of this going on, Jim managed to convince his followers to take all of their lives in one massive, horrific event, and this day has gone on to become known as the Jonestown. A total of 918 people died that day, including Jim himself. In our number 5 spot today we have Jeffrey Keane. Jeffrey Keane had lived a lot of his life and was already retired when he started to believe in his past life. Jeffrey and his wife went on vacation to Maryland when they visited a battlefield from the Civil War that was called Sunken Road, and that is when he became overwhelmed with emotion. Apparently the emotion was so strong that he truly thought he might have been having a heart attack. After this emotion passed and he was able to gather himself, he still felt an unbelievable connection to this place. At a later date, he encountered a psychic at a party and had relayed this history to them. The psychic asked if he believed in reincarnation, and Jeffrey felt like he had to reply with the words, quote, "not yet." After this day, Jeffrey was reading a Civil War magazine when he came across a Civil War general named General Gordon. General Gordon had fought at Sunken Road, and during this battle he was known for constantly shouting the words, quote, "not yet." This of course caused Jeffrey to do more research research into the general, where he found out even more connections, such as how on his 30th birthday, Jeffrey had to go to the hospital with a random, really terrible jaw pain, and when General Gordon was 30, he was shot in the jaw. Or how General Gordon had suffered certain injuries and Jeffrey had unexplained marks on his body in the same spots. This could all be a coincidence, but it definitely is a very interesting story regardless. In our number 4 spot today, we have Alan John Miller. Alan is an ex-software manufacturer turned founder of the Jesus cult. Alan himself claims that he is actually the reincarnation of Jesus, and his partner is the reincarnation of Saint Mary Magdalene. Thank goodness these two were able to somehow find each other. Alan holds, quote, divine truth seminars where he teaches what he refers to as the divine love path, which focuses mainly on emotional clearing. Alan has even gone as far as to give doomsday predictions, which he said could start as early as 2012, which, I mean, 10 years later we all know simply did not happen. Alan believes that the movement of tectonic plates will cause severe earth changes, and they will result in a dramatic rise of the oceans. Apparently on his website he said, quote, both the east and west coasts of Australia will be underwater about 100 meters deep. In our number 3 spot today, we have Michael Trevesser, also known as Wayne Bent. This guy was the leader of what is called as the Lord Our Righteousness Church in New Mexico. In 2000, he claimed that he himself was the Messiah. He predicted that the world would end in 2007, which again, I can confirm was not true, and he stated that God had said to, quote, stay with me one more year, but a year later he was arrested for some of the most horrific crimes that I cannot even mention here on YouTube. Not only this, but he also admitted and acknowledged doing similar crimes before in the past, like it was just no big deal. He then went on to compare himself to Jesus Christ, and he told the media, quote, the current upheaval over me and the present contest is well underway. It was the same for Jesus. Jesus had not committed any crimes, so the authorities had to invent some crimes to crucify him over. It is the same for me also. I have committed no crimes, but many crimes are being imagined and concocted in the minds of men to try and kill me again. In our number 2 spot today, we have Sergey Benhayan. Sergey is an Australian bankrupt tennis coach who believes he is the reincarnation of famous Italian artist and scientist Leonardo da Vinci. This would be fine, except Sergey is also the founder of a pretty harmful cult called Universal Medicine, which has been criticized for its extremely unorthodox practices and the fact that he has 0 medical qualifications, the most important part. He not only has some extremely creepy and questionable practices that he says led to the curing of cancer, but his relationship workshops that cost tens of thousands of dollars have mostly led to divorce. How surprising. He also involves his daughter Natalie, and she claims that she can communicate with a woman's ovaries. No thank you. Do not talk to them. A New South Wales Supreme Court jury even found that it was true that he leads a socially dangerous and socially harmful cult. In our number 1 spot today, we have James Gibson. A man named James Gibson has an extremely troubled past and is actually a killer, which is truly never good, but he also believes that he is the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler. I feel like even if you really felt like this, that might just be one secret that like I personally would keep to myself forever, but James I guess feels a little differently. James really did have a difficult childhood and upbringing, which is quite sad. He lost his dad at a young age to the Black Saturday bushfires and had quite a troublesome time as a teenager. In 2015, he attacked and killed a man named Glenn Sullivan, and when asked why he did it, he said, quote, he killed my dad. I saw it in the smoke. James explained to his psychiatrist about his reincarnation belief, and he also explained that the German soldiers were controlling him and had ordered him to kill someone so that they could find him and recognize him so that they could come and retrieve him. All in all, James has obviously had a rough go. The things he's done cannot be excused, but I do hope he has received some help and maybe some treatment for everything he's got going on.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the General. In 2015, retired Fire Chief Jeffrey Keane came across evidence which he suggested was proof that he was Civil War General John B. Gordon in a past life. Yeah, not everyone can say that. While visiting a Civil War battlefield, he was inexplicably overcome with emotion and had trouble breathing. At one point, he even thought he was having a heart attack. A while later, he spoke to a psychic. As they talked, he felt compelled to say the words, "not yet." for no reason. He didn't know why he said those two words. Later on though, he found a Civil War magazine, and while flicking through it, the words "not yet" in quotation marks sort of jumped out at him. It was quoting the words of General Gordon, who said them while telling his troops to stay back during a battle on the exact same part of the battlefield where Jeffrey felt like he was having that heart attack. The picture of the general in the magazine also looked a lot like him. It gets weirder though. When Jeffrey turned 30, he went to hospital with an immense pain in his jaw and face. No cause was found. Sure enough, when investigators looked through General Gordon's life, he was shot in the face when he was 30 years old. It could all be a coincidence, but it's pretty strange, don't you think? Next up at number 9 now, we have the Golden Age. Ryan Hammonds was a boy who, at the age of 4, began having nightmares of people and places he didn't recognize. After a few months, he began to describe the details of this. It sounded like he was remembering the Golden Age of Hollywood. Cindy became concerned that there was more to Ryan's nightmares than initially thought. Cindy looked through a book about Hollywood and was amazed when Ryan pointed to a man in a photo and calmly said it was him in a past life. A child psychologist interviewed Ryan and found that he accurately described about 55 details of the man in the photo, an actor and Hollywood agent who had died in 1964. One creepy thing that stood out was that first they thought Ryan had got the age of death wrong for this guy called Marty. He said that he was 61 when he died, the death certificate said 59, but it turns out that the death certificate was actually wrong and Ryan was right the whole time. How could he have known that? That's kinda weird. Coming in at number 8 now, we have The Grandfather. This is a story of a boy called Sam who was studied by Dr. Jim B. Tucker of the University of Virginia. Now when Sam was 4 years old, his grandmother died. On that day, his father brought out an old photo album. Sam had never seen a picture of his grandfather before. When Sam saw a picture of his grandfather's first car, he pointed to it and said, "That's my car." When they showed him a picture of his granddad and some of his friends from when he was a boy, Sam pointed right to his grandfather and said, "There I am." They told him, "No, that's your grandfather." He said again, "No, that's me." He then began to share a lot of details that were creepily accurate. One that stood out was when he turned to his mother one day and said that in his past life, as his grandfather, someone had turned his sister into a fish. They asked him, who? He said, bad men. His grandfather's sister had actually been murdered and her corpse was dumped in a body of water. Is this proof of his reincarnation or a little bit of a stretch? I'll be interested to hear your opinions on this one. Next up at number 7 now guys, we have The Fire. This is the story of Luke Ruhlman, a 5-year-old boy who claimed to have lived a past life as Pam Robinson, an African American woman from Chicago who died in a fire at the Paxton Hotel in 1993. It all started when Luke was just 2 years old. He would talk about a woman called Pam. Eventually his mother asked him who this Pam woman was. He said he used to be her, but then he died and went to heaven. He saw God and then eventually God pushed him back down and he was a baby and then he was named Luke. More details came later. Luke's mother investigated all of this and found Pam Robinson, one of the 19 people who died in the 1993 hotel fire. Luke said that was him. I encourage you guys to read the full story and see for yourselves if there is anything to Luke's story of reincarnation. Moving on to number 6 now, we have Shanti Devi. When this Indian woman was 4 years old, she told her parents that her real home was in Mathura where her husband lived. Now Mathura was about 90 miles from her home in Delhi. Her parents tried to ignore her story, which frustrated Shanti so much that she ran away from home at the age of just 6 years old. She was trying to reach Mathura but was taken back before she could get there. She kept telling details of her past life though, telling people that she used to be married and that she died 10 days after giving birth to her child. Eventually her headmaster at school found a man in Mathura who said this story matched that of his wife who had died. Her name was Ludgi Devi. He too became convinced that Shanti Devi was the reincarnation of his wife. Shanti never married and continued to tell her story for the rest of her life. Coming in at number 5 now, we have the murder. Karan Filter-Tuzmas was 2 days away from the birth of her son in 1958 when she had a dream one night. In the dream, she saw a man whose face was covered in blood entering her room. She asked him why he had come and told him to leave as her husband was away. He told her that his name was Salim Fesley, and that he had been shot in the ear. When she awoke, Cranfield remembered hearing about a man just like that in a nearby village who had been accidentally killed. She told her husband about the dream. Her husband said he actually used to know the man. The boy was born, and as soon as he began to talk, he insisted that he was the reincarnation of the man in the dream. Except he claimed his death had been no accident and that he had actually been murdered. At the age of 4, he went to the village and talked with the man's widow. He recounted their life together and told the woman that he, the reincarnation of her husband, had not been killed in a hunting accident, he had been murdered. The widow and her children visited the boy as he grew up and very much believed that he was the reincarnation of the man they all knew. Moving on to number 4 now, we have solving a murder. There wasn't too much to go on with this story, but I'll give it a shot anyway. In 2015, it was reported that a 3-year-old boy from Golan Heights had a long red birthmark on his head. He claimed that he had been murdered in a past life, that the mark was a sign of his murder. Dr. Eli Lask investigated the case. When they went to a city, the boy recalled his original first and last names and the names of his murderer. A local overheard all of this and said that the name of the man who the boy claimed to be had actually gone missing 4 years earlier. The boy was then able to find his old home. He walked right up to a man nearby and said, "I used to be your neighbor. We had a fight and you killed me with an axe." The man turned pale and the boy continued, "I even know where you buried my body." The boy led them to the burial site and also found where the axe was hidden. The man then confessed to the murder. Incredibly, the location on the man's skull where the murderer's axe hit was exactly the same place as the boy's birthmark. Next up at number 3 now, we have Anne Frank. Barbro Karlin was born in Sweden in 1954 to Christian parents. Around the age of 3, she told her parents that she was not Barbro, but actually Anne Frank. She stopped acknowledging them as her real parents and told them that her real parents would come and get her soon. As she got older, she told them details of her life as Anne. Around age 7 or 8, she became very confused when her school teacher began talking about Anne Frank in class. She wondered how the teacher could know all these things about her. That's when she found out that Anne Frank was already a very famous person by then who had lived before, a victim of the Holocaust whose diary became one of the most important books in history. When she visited Amsterdam for the first time, she walked straight to Anne Frank's house without directions. Inside the house, she was stricken with anxiety. She broke out into a cold sweat and grabbed her mother's hand. She told her mother that the movie star pictures were still on the wall. Her mother couldn't see any of these. That's when one of the tour guides told them that they had been taken down for the day to be mounted on glass and put back up. The story goes on and on. There have been countless books written about it if you're still interested to hear more, and it really is interesting. Moving on to number 2 now, guys, we have the Pollock twins. Mr. and Mrs. Pollock were a couple who lived in Hexham, England. In 1957, tragedy struck when their daughters Joanna, aged 11, and Jacqueline, aged 5, were killed in a car accident. Their parents were devastated. A year went by and Mrs. Pollock became pregnant. To their surprise, she gave birth to identical twin girls. They named them Gillian and Jennifer. Although they were identical, they had different birthmarks. Jennifer had a birthmark on her waist that looked just like a birthmark that Jacqueline had. She also had a birthmark on her head that looked like another one of Jacqueline's scars. The family moved when the twins were just 3 months old. 2 years later, the girls started asking for toys that belonged to their older sisters, even though they had never seen these toys before. Eventually, the family returned to Hexham. Despite being too young to remember that town, the girls knew all of the landmarks that only their sisters should have known. They were also scared of moving cars and kept telling their parents the car is coming to get them. After the age of 5, these memories began to fade and the girls led normal lives. And finally at number 1 now, we have Nazi Al-Danaf. In 2000, this boy's story was studied by Dr. Haraldsson, a psychologist from the University of Iceland. At the age of 1.5, he told his mother, "I am not small, I am big. I carry 2 pistols, I carry 4 hand grenades. I am a fearless, strong person. Don't be scared by the hand grenades, I know how to handle them. I have a lot of weapons, my children are young, and I want to go see them." The guns and grenade talk was pretty shocking as it was, but his parents didn't even know that he knew these words at this age. The boy also showed an unusual interest in cigarettes and whiskey. He asked them if he could go back to his hometown, which was 10 miles away. They had never been there. When they arrived, he directed them to a house and then jumped out of the car. He ran ahead with his father while his mothers and sisters talked to a local and told them about Nazi's reincarnation story. The man was stunned. The details matched his deceased father's story exactly. When Nazi returned, the man asked him questions about the house, which he all got correct. He got details about the family's history completely right too. He even found weapons on the property that he had stashed in his past life. They showed him a picture of the man who had died and asked Nazi who it was. He said, "This is me. I was big, but now I am small."